Thank you all for joining us today, where Dave Kellogg and I are going to be discussing how go-to-market leaders can really unlock additional AI budget. Now, for all of you who don't know Dave, Dave is an exec in residence for Balterton Capital, and he's a former SaaS executive and someone I've met through when he was at Salesforce for many years. Dave is also involved in consulting for companies who are looking at AI SDRs, and I'm pumped to hear how, Dave, you're advising them on securing budgets. So, Dave, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dan. It's great to be here.
So since we're just running this off, since we're running a budget-focused session today, let's just start and give folks a little framework. What are some of the differences between how CROs, CMOs, and CFOs really think about the budget?
That's a great question, Dan, because it all starts there. Sellers and CROs, they tend to think about sales capacity. They're always worried about how much sales capacity do I have, how much quota can I carry, and 12 sellers means 6 SEs, 4 SDRs, and 2 managers, right? So it's maybe 1 alliances person. So it's kind of ratio-driven, headcount-based budgeting. Marketers think of things differently. Marketers tend to think of budgets in buckets. A very common bucketing is people, programs, infrastructure, right? And they might shoot for 40-40-20, or more commonly 45-45-10 in terms of percentages across those buckets. CFOs think about it yet again differently. They think of expense categories like operating expense and CapEx, like investment, but they keep a really close eye on headcount for 2 reasons. One, to fight empire building, something they're always worried about. And second, it's kind of a gross productivity measure because many investors look at productivity metrics like ARR per head. So there's really 3 different ways of looking at it.
I mean, obviously, it's no surprise that different execs really think about how to approach that problem differently. And that's why, so why does all the trouble start there? How does thinking that making things difficult for people, how does that make it difficult for people who are running SDR programs?
Sure. The best example of this is in the past, which is it used to be really hard to start an SDR program because you were fighting the CFO, right? Because the CFO doesn't want to see headcount go up. They don't want to see a lot of people at low salary get hired, right? They'd see SAP turnover would go up. Right, SDR is a high turnover position. So in general, on the metrics the CFO cared about, SDRs made everything look worse, right? Except, of course, for opportunity generation, which is super important, right? So that historically was an example. But today, it means we're going to break established ways of thinking. Like many companies wrestle with filling in the blank here. SDRs are an extension of blank. Sales or marketing, right? And if you move them from one to the other, as many people do, it's going to throw off historical ratios. Or, if SDRs are in marketing, which of the 3 buckets are they? Are they people? Are they programs if you outsource it? Or are they infrastructure? Or is the software to drive it infrastructure? Well, what bucket do I put it in? And how does that throw off historical comparisons, right? And breaking these established trends and ratios, right? But this doesn't compare to last year is hard. Because CFOs just like to look at the trends. So you're kind of starting in a hole if you move something around. So the last thing that makes this tricky is that AI SDRs generally substitute people expense for infrastructure expense, right? So they reduce people and increase infrastructure. So if you were to, for example, hold your SDR team at 4 instead of growing it to 8 next year, well, the good news is no one's going to accuse you of empire building. The other good news is you've freed up $400K, right? Say it's 4 heads at $80K each, called $100K fully loaded. So there's $400K that you won't be spending, right? So that's kind of your investment ceiling for an AI SDR. And say your AI SDR costs $200K, well, you could get accused of being toy happy because look at that CMO putting all that money into infrastructure and software. They love their MarTech, boy, right? And people are going to come hit you with that. And they may say, well, why aren't you spending more money, demand gen, generating programs?
Yeah.
And of course, SDRs are really the last mile of demand gen.
Yeah, totally. And so you're just saying, you're saying that justifying an AI SDR is just really hard because you're upsetting the budgeting apple cart and getting all those folks aligned.
Exactly right, because they each have their way of looking at it, and you're going to upset it, and you're going to break historical comparisons. And look, if you're not in corporate finance, if you're not into corporate finance, this may all seem crazy because you're like, hey, just cash comes in and cash goes out. But that's just not the way it works, right? If you're going to learn to play the game, you need to learn to play it right? We need to learn how to play the budgeting game. And the budgeting game cares about headcount, which in this case is good because headcount will be staying flat or going down. So that's easier. It's harder to make headcount go up. The budgeting game cares about ratios and trends. In this case, infrastructure is going to go up. right? Not programs, and people want to see programs go up, and it cares about ROI.
So so ROI, obviously, so we've talked about, obviously, the headcount, the ratios and trends, but we've yet to talk about ROI. Tell me a little bit more about that.
So first, as you may know, I lived in France for 5 years, so as I say, ROI was king, right? Wow, the French word. So ROI is king. Everyone cares about ROI. And the issue is, I don't actually think ROI is the right place to start. You can build a 3-year ROI model, and I'm sure vendors like you guys help people do that. And you look at the cost you're taking out, and you look at the cost of the software, and you look at direct costs and indirect costs, and kind of any MBA or financial planning and analysis person can help you build one of those models. But I actually prefer not to start there. I like to build that model and then keep it in my back pocket. I like to start by just looking at the impact on the plan. For example, say last year we generated 400 opportunities with a demand gen budget, I'm going to say inclusive of SDRs, of $1.6 million. And we had a 20% opportunity close rate and a 50K ASP. And that means that we generated opties at a cost per opti of $4,000 each, and a pipe to spend ratio of one we used at Salesforce, as you will recall, of 12.5, right? I like to say, look, if you let me buy this AI SDR, sure, we can show you the ROI model, but if you let us make this investment, me as CMO, here's what I'm going to sign up for next year. I'm going to generate 600 opties at $2.25 million in demand gen budget. And thanks to some other tweaks in opti to close and ASP, I believe we're going to end up with a cost per opportunity. More than I believe we're going to end up with, I am willing to sign up for a cost per opportunity of $37.50 and a pipe to spend of 16. And that's really what I call kind of the punchline approach. That's the punchline. If you let me spend this money, here's what I'm going to do for you next year, and it's going to be more efficient than we were last year.
So, I mean, tell me a little bit more around, why you like this approach more than the traditional like ROI model.
Sure, because I think you're kind of giving the audience what they want to hear.
Yeah.
Most budgeting sessions, they're built ultimately for kind of the CEO, the CFO, and the board, right? In the end, the board needs to approve the budget. So everything wants to be pretty high level. And an ROI model is kind of low level, right? It's detailed. It's good to have it, right? You have to do your homework. You need to have it in your pocket. But when you're talking in a budget review meeting, the CFO and CEO, they want the punchline. Right. I ran a planning company for 6 years, and I helped a lot of people with financial plans, and those want the punchline. What does this mean for the business? And the answer is simple. Last year, we generated 400 opties at a cost per opti of $4K. Next year, with this tool, I'm going to sign up for 600 opties at $3.75K. That's the impact on the business.
Yeah. I mean, it's obviously common because I think we're all used to, as you called it out, used to just showing the ROI model approach because that's just something that we're used to. And of course, the ROI model is going to work out that it's like, hey, you should buy it, right? So getting to the punchline is really the right approach. So after we present that punchline approach to the customer and they do like what they see, what happens then?
Yeah, so if it works, if you kind of close the sale on the argument by saying, hey, wait a minute, they can sign up to generate more opties at 3.75K instead of 4K? I'm interested in that. If they believe you, they immediately switch to risk mode. It's just like a sales cycle. Like when somebody buys a house, they're really excited about the house. And then when they get serious, they get nervous, right? They're like, what about termites? What about flood zone? What about plumbing, right? And you'll know you're winning the argument for the budget because they're going to flip and say, how do you know this is going to work? It's going to be, how are you sure we should do it? What do you still need to sign up for? Is there an ROI? And then when they bite, it's, how do you know this is going to work? So because they're in risk mode, they just flipped like a home buyer. And that's when you need to talk about the diligence, the other homework you've done, the customer references you've talked to who are doing the same, ideally, the same thing in the same industry at the same scale, right? They're solving the same problem you're going to solve. The vendor reputation, what's their pedigree? Where do they come from? How big are they? Who's their investors? What's their technology? And then a project plan. Right? These are all about risk, right? One is, does this vendor know how to solve this problem? Have they done it before? References. Number two, is this vendor someone we should work with, right? Reputation, pedigree, investors, tech. Number three, is this project going to work, right? It might be, maybe they could solve this problem. Maybe it's a great vendor, but what about me? Do we have a project plan in place to make this thing successful? Who are the consultants who are going to work on deploying this at my company? So, because when somebody flips to risk, you want to come back with basically there's no better answer than we are in the middle of the fairway for this vendor's strategy. They do this all day long. We're not trying to push the envelope on scale. We're not trying to push, right? Nothing makes a conservative CFO happier than knowing, oh, they've done this before. We've done our homework, not only in the ROI model, but we've checked references. The vendor seems reputable, and we've got a plan with kind of credible consultants in place to make sure this thing is successful.
I mean, I'm sure sales folks love when they hear those buying signals of asking for that. And I love how you called it out where they switch to risk, the profile switches to risk and understanding all those buying signals. So obviously let's fast forward. I know we've unlocked the budget a little bit here. Then next is obviously the success plan. What are you seeing out there in terms of the preferred deployment model of AI SDRs these days for the companies that you're consulting with? Because I'm curious, it's like if they're switching to risk at that point, in the previous question, like then they're obviously thinking about, okay, well, how do I deploy these AI SDRs? How are you looking at it?
So people are actually, the companies I'm working with are pretty aggressive, probably more so than I'd be. I'm a fairly conservative guy. But the people I've done have kind of gone both feet in. You could, in theory, do a regional experiment, like do East only or North America only, or a vertical experiment. Let's try it in this industry. I've not seen people do that, but those are kind of classic containment or kind of risk mitigation strategies. Limit the scope. Let's try this thing, but not everywhere. Another thing people do is the whole inbound outbound split, right? And they say, okay, let's get rid of our inbound team and or preferably move the inbound SDRs to outbound, and let's give all the inbound to the AI SDR. That seems to be almost the default strategy. And what we're trying to do is push the higher value added work up the ladder to humans, leaving the lower value added work to AI. I like that model, but I like to put a twist on it, which is in my preferred model, we send basically high value inbound. So either ABM accounts, account-based marketing accounts, and or strategic target accounts, right? With good titles. So like directors and VPs at target 200 accounts all go directly to the sales rep, as they should anyway, right? You would bypass a human SDR just like you'd bypass an AI SDR in that case. So once you kind of skim off the stuff you really want to hand directly to sales, which creates a big reporting burden, right, to make sure they're following up on it, which is the downside of humans. AI is better at making sure stuff happens on the process than humans are. Everything else goes to the AI SDR. So you can almost think of it as an AI-driven nurture for non-strategic accounts or for non-strategic contacts at strategic accounts. I like that model. I think it's the right balance for today.
Well, hey, Dave, I think we're coming to the end here. Any last nuggets of wisdom that you want to share with our audience on unlocking budget for AI SDRs overall?
The only thing we didn't cover was the low-hanging fruit of, hey, make sure if there is top-down AI budget, go grab it.
Yeah.
Sure it has to go without
saying. Yeah, I mean, that's usually the easy one. It's like, I've got money to spend, so here you are.
Yeah, so. Don't forget it. Look, I know boards are putting pressure on CEOs who are putting pressures on C-level execs to go adopt AI tools. So if that money's there, go grab some. Other than that, we got to do this the old-fashioned way, which is going to be the combination of a detailed ROI model, which I argue you keep in your pocket through the process. Only when you need it do you pull it out. And the way you pitch this is by looking at the overall impact on the plan that you're committing to and just saying, if you let us buy this tool, we commit to deliver this many opties at this much cost. And once you do that, you'll have the audience if they start asking you risk questions.
I love it. Well, hey, Dave, I mean, that's all we have time for today. I mean, if you want to hear more from Dave, please follow his blog at Kellogg, KELLBLOG.com, or just follow Dave Kellogg on LinkedIn. But Dave, thank you so much again for joining me and for an awesome discussion around budgeting for AI SDRs.
Thanks so much for having me, Dan.
All right, take care.